All right, so just a brief introduction for everyone who's come. We first came across Dr. Andrew Dent by watching his TED Talk on rediscovering the concept of thrift in material science and product design. And after we learned more about his work with innovative and sustainable products with Fortune 500 clients such as Tesla, Google, Facebook, and Nike, to name a few, we felt that he would provide a really interesting perspective to students at AHS on how the products we use on a daily basis are created and what the future looks like to create the next generation of sustainable products. So it's our honor today to host Dr. Dent at AHS. Dr. Andrew Dent has been involved in utilizing revolutionary technologies such as synthetic biodegradable spider silk, printed circuit boards made out of nanocellulose, and enzymes that can make plastic infinitely recyclable. He is the Executive Vice President of Materials Research at Materials ConneXion, the Chief Materials Scientist at SANDOW, and a professor at a university in New York. He's worked in both academia and industry at Cambridge University, the British Ministry of Defense, the US Navy, Rolls-Royce, and NASA. He is also the co-author of the Material Innovation book series and a frequent speaker on sustainable material strategies at events such as TEDx Grand Rapids and TED NYC, where his talks have garnered millions of views. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Dent.
Sure, you're welcome. It's nice to meet everybody. Thanks for having me. Okay, so over the next 40 minutes, I kind of want to take you through, first of all, what I do and the sort of work that our company undertakes. I then want to take you through a presentation. I'll share the screen. I've got a few slides to show you. I kind of want to give you an understanding about where we are with materials at the moment. Some of the, and focusing a lot on sustainable materials. Hopefully I can sort of teach you a little bit more about the way that we as material scientists consider materials and the way that designers and brands also interact with those materials. So let me, I'll stop showing myself and I'll start showing my screen. So if you hold on a second, I've got a presentation that I can put together. So,
Sure. So while Dr. Dent is doing that, we'd also like to thank our amazing club advisor, Mrs. Martin, for making this possible and guiding us through the process. And we'll also provide a brief overview on how the event will work. So I'm Krish Park, and I'll be running the Q&A.
I'm Aditya, and I'll be moderating this Zoom meeting.
I'm Sanjay. And our other members today, and we will be compiling your guys' questions during the Q&A to ask Mr. Dent.
Great. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. So this is a presentation I put together for a different conference, but I thought it might be relevant here. So what I'll first do actually is I'm going to talk about my company to start with. So for the last 20 years, I have been running a materials library and consultancy that helps everybody from, as you mentioned, from Google to Tesla. We work with Apple, we work with Nike, a lot of the big fashion brands. We help some of the big architects, because everybody who produces anything physical, so whether it's your phone company, whether it's a company that made your bed, the clothes that you're wearing, the car that you drive, if you produce something physical, then you are going to need materials. And if you want to improve your product, chances are you're going to want to improve those materials. Think about the way in which bicycles have changed from steel through to aluminum through to carbon fiber. The same thing with planes. Think about how cars have improved in their performance through using new materials. Every single one of the products out there and all the spaces we live in have improved and changed through the use of more innovative and more sustainable materials. So we help everybody in choosing those materials. I have a big library in New York City. Unfortunately, I'm in my apartment in Brooklyn right now, but we have a big library in New York City, right near Grand Central, now the main train station. And it's a big library, kind of similar to what you're seeing right there, which has thousands of material samples. Samples for everything. Samples for making samples for making cars, samples for making, okay, go. Sorry.
I'm gonna poop, so when I say turn.
It's okay, I can't help you right now. I'm sorry, that's my 6-year-old son. I apologize. Okay.
No worries.
So we help those clients find the materials to build new buildings, to create new aircraft, to build new cars. And it's sort of, and it's constantly evolving. We're always finding new stuff. So the people we talk to who make the materials, they can be the big suppliers, people you've probably heard of, DuPont you've probably heard of, companies like that who make materials. There are many of those. So you've got the big global companies that are producing materials. You've also got smaller companies. We work with startups who've just created a wonderful new material that they think might be good for Tesla or might be great on a new Apple phone. So we work with those vendors as well, those suppliers. So people are making materials. We sample those materials in our library. We show them to people like Apple and Tesla, and then if they want to use them, then they connect with their original supplier, and then they use those materials. So it's that connecting process that we do. So, okay, we work with every industry, as you can see. Consumer electronics, fashion, sportswear, home products. If you look around your bedroom right now, all of the materials that you see, whether it's the wall paint, whether it is the bed itself, whether it's any sort of consumer electronics you have on your table, all of those materials, the clothes that you're wearing, we work with all of those brands and we help them find new materials. And we're going to continue to do that in order to make sure that they can stay sort of ahead of the game and also produce better products for you. Now, a major part of that new sort of interest in materials has been sustainability. I'm sure you talk about it at school. It's been in the news a lot. The concern about climate change, the concern about the wildfires, the increasing water, our increasing level of seas. Sustainability is a major aspect of material choice. So we help an awful lot of our clients think about materials in a different way, because up until then, everybody cared about three things, okay, when they think about new material. Performance, like how good is it? Its cost, and then what does it look like? So those are the main three things. Now we've got a fourth. So we've got its cost, its performance, what it looks like, and then also how is it in terms of sustainability. So that fourth area has changed an awful lot the way in which these brands think about materials. They start thinking, okay, we need to add in some recycled content. Maybe we want to use materials that are not from oil or not mined from the ground. How do we, choose materials which are perhaps what they call renewable, so therefore can be grown, used again and again. Think about the way in which a tree is used. Okay, tree grows, you take the wood, but basically once you've taken the wood, some of the seeds fall down and create another tree. So you've got that continual process, the continual renewal. So it's possible to do that with things such as cotton and wood and those types of materials. Not, obviously impossible to do with metals and glass, because, but there are also some plastics that do have that ability. So we have plastics that come from a renewable resource, whether it is from corn, whether it's from wood or cotton. So we can produce a lot of these plastics out of a renewable resource. So, but what I state here, and what you see on my first slide, is there's no such thing as a sustainable material. And I want to before you say, well, that's not true, because companies are always presenting sustainable materials as new things. Okay, the reason I want to say that is, and this is the reason why. And okay, so this is I think it's the tail end of a Boeing Dreamliner. The huge new passenger aircraft from Boeing. So this is the rear end, okay? So this is almost entirely a carbon fiber composite, the sort of stuff we see in sports cars and bicycle frames. Okay, so carbon fiber itself is not a sustainable material at all. You can't recycle it in the way that you can with paper or plastic or metal. So, and also the way that you manufacture it, it's really a nasty process. It's got some nasty chemicals. So in general, this would be a very unsustainable material, okay? However, because the Boeing Dreamliner is made out of carbon fiber, it is significantly lighter. And as a result, the amount of fuel required to basically take this plane from San Francisco to New York is cut by a huge amount. So it is more sustainable to use this unsustainable material because of the fuel savings it gives. So when I make that statement about there's no such thing as a sustainable material, you can't simply just put in a recycled material into an existing product and expect it to actually improve in sustainability. So it all depends on how you use it. So just having a product and then deciding to use sustainable materials inside of that, That's not going to solve your problem. And by the example of this, the tail end of the Boeing Dreamliner. So we can use nasty materials if they overall reduce environmental impact by, in this case, significantly reducing the amount of fuel needed to take that plane from, let's say, San Francisco to London, to New York. Okay, so I also want to put this as well. So it's interesting as well. We've heard a lot about the Pacific garbage patch, the concern we have about the amount of plastics we're putting out there into the world. Okay, so sustainability is also an odd beast in that the things that you perhaps think would be more sustainable sometimes aren't. And the reason why I've got you this example here of the difference between a regular paper Starbucks cup and perhaps a styrofoam Dunkin' Donuts cup, and the regular egg carton made out of pulped paper and one made out of expanded polystyrene is the plastic one is more sustainable. So even though it's made out of plastic we know is not particularly nice and people have stopped using it, the amount of energy and carbon footprint, i.e. the amount of carbon we put up into the air using those types of plastics, those foam materials, is less than if we use the paper material. But the challenge we have is that if they're left to go out into the environment, the pulped paper of the cup and also the egg carton will quickly it'll basically wash away and will not have any effect on the environment. So even though it took more energy to produce and put more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, the plastic will stay for 300 years. So that egg carton ends up in the environment. If it doesn't end up on a landfill, ends up out, on the streets or ends up in the ocean, it's going to stay there for 300 years. And that's the problem we have currently. But even though plastics overall are more sustainable than most other materials, and that's the reason why we moved. Think about the way we moved towards more plastics in automotive. Think about, we've moved towards more plastics in every part of the world. If you weren't alive when, even before my time, it's in the 50s and 60s, everything was made out of glass and metal. Or natural materials. Then the plastics half century happened from the 60s onwards. We started using more and more plastics, which was great because it reduced cost, it reduced the amount of weight we had, it allowed us to produce more different things. But unfortunately, it then put a whole bunch of plastics out there into the environment, and that's the problem. Okay, so let me talk about some plastics in the ocean. Okay, it's a hot topic, it's a concern. Because this, of course, contributes to not just plastics in the ocean, but also microplastics that we have out in our environment. I think there was a recent study that said there are more microplastics in California than there are stars in the known universe. So we're talking about, trillions and trillions of microplastics out just in California. So we've got a real problem with this. So there's also a lot of plastics in the ocean. We've seen the Pacific garbage patch. We've seen all that material there. It doesn't look very nice. It doesn't help the wildlife there. So let's learn a little bit more about that. So at least we understand what the metrics are. There's a whole bunch out there, okay? A whole bunch of plastics out there in the ocean. The majority is plastic water bottles, okay? But I'll talk a little bit about other stuff in there as well. But okay, so given that there's a whole bunch of plastic, are there any good plastics that are okay for the ocean? Okay, so given that we're still using an awful lot of plastics, a lot of the brands, when they're producing things, I'm making this new phone, I don't want the plastic to end up in the ocean, or if I do, I want to make sure it breaks down quite quickly. So it turns out there are only 3 plastics currently that are actually okay to put in the ocean. One of them is rayon, which is a sort of sometimes called satin. It's a fake silk. It's used for Hawaiian shirts. So that one will break down quite quickly in the ocean. There's an experimental bioplastic that's really currently only being used. That breaks down quite quickly in the ocean. And then cellophane, the stuff we often find wrapping around things as a clear plastic, that breaks down quite quickly in the ocean as well. Everything else does not. So every other plastic out there on the planet, if you put it into the ocean, it stays there and doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't break down. These break down in a matter of months to within about a year. Every other plastic will stay out there for a long time. That's why the problem we have. So how much do we have? And basically, what is there? Don't worry about this, apart from the fact that you can see the types of things that are in the ocean. And in terms of the most amount, it's actually fishing nets. So although we see the bottles in the ocean, we're concerned about that, the majority is fishing nets. So there's a whole bunch of stuff there, the majority is fishing nets. And this is the sort of stuff that you find. The advantage with this, of course, is that a fishing net's much easier to pull out of the ocean than a bottle. Once I start pulling on one end of a fishing net, then I can get most of it out of the ocean. So I can get 50 pounds of plastic out of the ocean in one go. Whereas a bottle, it takes quite a while. So there are mostly fishing nets in the ocean. They are relatively easy to get out of them. But that's just one of the challenges we have. Also, this is a picture of the world, okay? And what this says is, as well as the plastics that you find already in the ocean, there are parts of the world where the majority of the plastic also then ends up in the ocean, even if it was originally out in the street. So what I'm saying is, so the areas in red are countries and infrastructures where they don't have very good landfilling, okay? If you don't have good landfilling, what happens is all of the trash that you produce in a city, well, where does it go? Some of it goes to landfill, but the majority of it basically just gets thrown out. And when I say thrown out, I mean thrown out into the streets, thrown out into the fields. And then what happens? So it rains. So that trash then eventually gets washed down into the river, or maybe it goes down to the beach, and then eventually it ends up in the ocean. So these are areas where it's possible to source plastics and take them from areas, because these are areas where you don't have good landfill infrastructure, you don't have any recycling, and as a result, an awful lot of the plastics from these regions, everything goes to the ocean. Thousands of tons of plastics every year go to the ocean in these regions. Obviously, America's not perfect. We don't recycle as well as we can. The average soda bottle, the iconic water bottle, soda bottle, even though that's the easiest thing to recycle, it basically only gets recycled about 25% of the time. So out of every 4 water bottles, only 1 will get recycled. The rest will either go into landfill, probably 2 of them, and one of them ends up in the ocean or basically out there in the world. So it's a concern we have. So we know that not many plastics actually degrade in the ocean. Most don't. Most last for hundreds of years. And there are plenty of areas where a lot of the trash we're producing immediately just goes out there into the ocean because it ends up in rivers, it ends up on the beach, and eventually everything ends up in the ocean. Okay, talked a little bit about plastics. Okay, so we know that those are not great. We know that we're trying to, and there is a whole range of recycled plastics. We're also looking at bioplastics as well. Bioplastics are plastics made from a renewable resource, whether that is, okay, so think about you guys may not know what a Craftsman screwdriver is. The original screwdriver with an orange handle, that was made out of plastic, but the original plastics were actually bioplastics. So there are many bioplastics out there. And by bioplastic, I mean a plastic that's been produced from something that's renewable. A tree, some cotton, some corn, some sugarcane, maybe some castor beans. They're all renewable materials. They are industrial crops. And they can be synthesized to make plastics that are exactly the same as the plastics that you find out there, whether it's for a water bottle, whether it's for the case for a phone, whether it is the paint on the outside of a car. We can make those out of bio-based materials. Because don't forget, I'm not sure whether you're aware of this, that the oil that makes the plastic, so the oil that powers our cars, and the oil that makes plastic, where did that originally came from? That came from the ground, okay? But how is it produced? It was produced by millions of years ago, flora and fauna, so trees and plants, basically getting crushed and getting squished down and pressed down and eventually ending up as oil. Oil is simply just flora and fauna, so plants and trees and that sort of thing from the seabed and out from on the land. It's those materials that over millions of years got pressed down, went between rock strata, and then ended up as oil. So oil that we use for our cars and also for our plastics was originally plants and trees and some animals. So it's not surprising that we can manufacture plastics from bio-based sources because they came from bio-based sources originally, just millions of years ago. So plastics. We like bioplastics, we like to use recycled plastics. plastics in the ocean is a concern, just because of the amount of material. And our challenge at the moment is there is no viable solution for it, because we still keep on producing more plastic. So a lot of the clients we work with, a lot of the main brands that you know as recognizable brands, they're looking for ways in which they can use recycled materials or bio-based materials, so they don't have to rely upon virgin plastics coming out of oil. But also, a lot of the bioplastics they will biodegrade, or they can be recycled. So we're looking to improve recycling, to improve the ability of plastics to compost, as a way to reduce the amount of plastic we have in the ocean. But it's going to be a tough thing. We are currently, expanding a lot of the production we have. Think about the basic idea of capitalism is you got to produce more. The reason why Nike is successful is it keeps on producing more stuff. So in its attempts to improve its sustainability, it's fighting against the fact that even if it improves its sustainability what it did 2020, it wants to sell more in 2021. So then it has to increase the sustainability to continue to deal with the increased amount of products that it sells. It's a vicious circle. Capitalism doesn't help sustainability, but we're at least moving towards improving. Okay, so other materials out there in the world. Glass and ceramic, the window that you look out from your bedroom, the ceramic mug that you drink your cup of tea of, or the plate that you're eating your dinner off of. These are hard, durable materials. You can recycle glass. So it's possible to recycle glass. You can recycle glass from cars, you can recycle glass from windows, you can recycle glass from beer bottles and soda bottles and iced tea bottles. They can be recycled. They don't end up back as other bottles, but they do end up as other products. So people do recycle glass. As you can see, about 33% of our current glass use in the US is recycled. So not enough, but at least a third. And we're using that again in other applications. Ceramics, nobody recycles it. The only way it gets reused is if it gets broken down and used in roads. So the ceramics you see, your plates, your cups, toilets, sinks, bars, all these different things, if they're made out of ceramic, when they're end of their life, they're not really recycled in any effective way. They're broken down and sometimes end up as filler for roads, but that's about it. So the advantage with these materials, however, is they are durable. I have glasses that are 30 years old. Pieces of ceramic, we know from museums, we've got pieces of ceramic that last thousands of years. So ceramics and glass are a lot more durable, but they're not easy to recycle. With metals, it's a little better. All metals are recyclable, and you can keep on recycling them. One good example is if one of your parents has a gold ring or a gold necklace, chances are that gold could well have been mined by the conquistadors, half a millennia ago. Because with gold, nobody throws it out. No one says, "Oh, I'm finished with this ring," and they throw it in the trash. That doesn't happen. We do it with a lot of our plastics. We don't think there's much value, but with metals, we don't do that. And metals can be recycled again and again and again. There's no reason why you can't recycle them infinitely. Same with all metals. That's one advantage they have. So some of the steel that you've got in your current Toyota Camry may well have come from an Oldsmobile in the 50s. Steel maintains its performance and value, and it can keep on getting recycled. That's why there are scrap yards. That's why we recycle gold and other precious metals, and why Apple is now coming out with a 100% recycled content aluminum computer. So 100% of the metal used in the computer has been recycled, has come from something else. That's a great thing. So that one advantage with metals is that they have this repeatability. You can keep on using them again and again. You can take them steel from your car, put it into a smelter, come out with some more metal and use it again in a new car, and it won't lose any performance. That's rare in any material. Okay. We use a lot of recycled content in our cans, in our computers, in other things as well. So this is an excellent way in which we can have a sort of circular approach to sustainability. Yes, it takes a lot of energy to melt these things down, because unlike plastic, which you can melt down at a few hundred degrees centigrade, like twice the boiling point of water, you can probably melt quite a few plastics. With metals, you're needing temperatures which are in the thousands of degrees Fahrenheit. So it takes a lot of energy to do that, but it is possible, and it's the best way to do it. So it's best to recycle these materials, and that's why you'll see an excellent industry in the recycling of metals. It's also good to make things that are actually, and a lot of our designers are interested in making things that can be pulled apart easily. Because although something may be made out of things that could be recycled, if you can't pull them apart, then there's no point, because if you can't pull the metal away from the piece of glass, from the other pieces of plastic, then you can't recycle it anyway. So we have recommended that designers look towards way in which they can pull things apart. That's a chair. It can be pulled apart into those constituent parts within a few minutes. So then I can recycle the wheels in the right place, the stand in the right place, the back and the other bits in the right places. So it becomes a lot more easy to recycle, and therefore can be used again. Because if the chair couldn't be pulled apart, all it does is it ends up in the landfill. And that's obviously a thing we want to try to avoid. There are a bunch of natural materials, and up until, we still use an awful lot of them. Think about the wood that's in your home. Think about the clothing you're wearing. Quite possibly that's an awful lot of natural. If you're wearing leather shoes, think about an awful lot. Think about the Coney Island boardwalk. An awful lot of natural materials. When I say natural, these things are renewable. It's wood, it's linen, it's cotton. It can be bioplastics. It can be cork. And there's a whole bunch of stuff out there that has value that is renewable, can be grown again, so is perpetual, and we don't have to worry about running out of it. It's an interesting point, actually. We are running out of some materials. Glass, because glass is based upon sand. Glass is made out of sand. We're running out of sand. We're not going to take it out of beaches, but it's getting harder and harder to get that sand. We're running out of certain metals as well. It's getting harder to find them. When we first started mining for copper, every time you got a big lump of copper ore out of the ground, 50% of it was copper. Now, every time we get a big lump of ore out of the ground for copper, 1% of it is copper. So it means you get an awful lot of waste, awful lot of energy to do that. So we're running out of certain materials. So we've got to be a lot more careful about the things that we have a finite resource from. Naturals, however, as long as we keep on growing corn, keep on growing trees, keep on growing cotton, we're fine. As long as the crops keep on coming up, then we can keep on using that material. So for naturals, we're less concerned about them disappearing because we know we can always grow them again. That's one advantage we have with natural materials. We've seen the use of bamboo. It's a very fast-growing, it's fast-growing grass. That grass, that's very effective in sustainability. Fungi, we've seen some packaging materials made out of compressed mushroom. So that's a great material. It can be grown in the dark. It basically requires no water, no light, and it grows in a few days. So it's a very effective packaging material used there. Algae, we've started to use some of the gunk that you see in rivers and in lakes, that green gunk. It can be used. It can be used for batteries. It can be used for plastic. It can be used for fabrics. And cork as well. Once we stopped using cork for wine bottles, there was an excess of cork. And cork is a great material. It can be used for chairs. We can manufacture buildings out of it. This is actually a case where they're putting steel onto the outside of a piece of cork and using it as insulation for buildings. So there are a whole bunch of natural materials, bio-based materials that we can use that have value that we didn't really think about, because up until a few years ago, plastics did everything. But then we realized we didn't really want plastics anymore because they clog up things, they get into our oceans, there's too much of them around. So we can go back to natural materials and use those instead. I talk about thrift in my, in one TED talk. I love waste. Waste for me is the way forward. We have massive landfills that can be mined for materials. Every manufacturing process that produces some sort of waste, someone else can use that material. So for waste for one person is an excellent resource for another. The challenge we have is that for a lot of people, waste, there's an ick factor. Okay, think about it. Okay, so when you go get your hair cut, okay, so you're sitting there in the barber's chair and you put your hand through your hair and you love it. You love your hair. It's your crowning glory. You think about it. You cut. Make sure it's cut well. You make sure it's got product in it. You love your hair. It's wonderful. You're happy touching it. You go to the barber's. The barber cuts that hair. As soon as that hair lands on the ground, it's disgusting. I wouldn't touch it. No one wants to get anywhere near it. It's awful. So what changed? Nothing. The perception of going from usable or viable or valuable material, the hair on my head, to disgusting waste material, my hair on the ground. So there's a lot of that we're trying to overcome. The concern about waste materials being dirty, being therefore contaminated. Most of them aren't, because most manufacturing processes are relatively clean. So there's a whole bunch of waste materials that we could use, and there's a whole industry growing up around the use of waste materials. Whether it is, there's a company in Italy that's making plates and bowls out of cow shit. So basically, there's a farmer who has basically a dairy, and they were drowning in cow shit. So they realized that cow shit is basically just cellulose fibers. So what they do is they baked it, cleaned it, and now manufacture products out of it. It's perfectly fine. The material itself is clean. We've seen waste material. There's a company in London that used waste chewing gum. It asks people to put chewing gum into little containers in London, and then takes that chewing gum and manufactures products out of it. So from the ick factor, used chewing gum, to the valuable factor of a coffee cup or a pair of sneakers, because we can clean those materials. We can synthesize them, make them usable again. There's value in waste. Floor mats made out of the plastic waste that nobody wants. People want water bottles, the waste water bottles, because they have a value. I can manufacture a chair out of them. I can manufacture a shirt out of waste water bottles. Plenty of the brands out there, Levi's does it, Nike do it. They manufacture some of their clothing out of waste water bottles, because that plastic's clean. All that happened was it ended up on the shelf. I then bought it, I drank from it, I then recycled it. It's clean. There's plenty of other plastics that we end up really quite dirty, but there are ways in which we can use those. So these plastic mats used for construction are from all the bits of plastic waste we didn't want. The used Lay's potato chip bag, the grocery bag, the sort of wrapper around certain things. There's a whole bunch of different bits of plastic which have very little use to someone else. This company up in Vermont uses them and manufactures things out of them. This company uses the Capri Sun containers and also toothpaste tubes. So the sort of mottled effect on those products, the sort of shimmery effect, is because there's aluminum in there as well. So your Capri Sun juice pack contains aluminum, a metal. So they chop it up, manufacture it into these shoe bases, but they're using these sorts of low value waste materials because there's value in almost every type of waste. And this one is using food scraps. It's an Israeli company that's taking food scraps that normally would have ended up in a compost or just in a landfill. They can manufacture plastic out of it. So the waste banana peel, the old bit of pizza, those types of things, you synthesize it right, it ends up as viable plastic. And the containers those sort of powders are in, those containers were manufactured from things such as banana skins and other household waste. So waste has a great value. As long as you can get past the ick factor, then there's a certain, there is an awful lot of money to be made from these types of resources. Okay, so I know I've gone through a whole bunch of different things there. Obviously, there's quite a bit. I'm happy to send the presentation to you if you want to look at it afterwards. What I want you to do, though, what I want you to take from this presentation is, first of all, whenever you look at any of your products again, think about what it's made of. Think about how it's made. Think about whether you might have chosen a different product if that manufacturer had been more considerate about the materials they were using. A lot of people are basing their consumer choices upon brands who reflect their values. I purchased this brand because it reflects who I am. It cares about the environment. It's thinking about the future for us. So it's using recycled materials. It's making sure that the product can be pulled apart or recycled or reused. So think about it. So, my hope is that you'll think differently about everything that you interact with, all the products that you have, all the things that you purchase. Before you purchase it, think about it. What is it made of? Has that company considered the end of the life of that product, especially when it comes to packaging? When I drink my Starbucks cup, has that company thought about what happens to that cup at the end of its life? Think about the billions of Starbucks cups that are out there in the world. So just think about the products that you purchase. Think about that, and think about how also in your head, how might you have improved it? How would you say, take a product that you're about to purchase? How would I have looked at this and made it better? Would I have made it so I could recycle it easier? Would I have thought about a way in which the brand itself could take that product back so I don't have to think about disposing it? So it's always that thing. Just all I'm asking a lot of my clients to do, and you as well, is to, before you do anything and interact with something physical that you're going to purchase, just think. Because there are ways in which we can improve it, and your minds will hopefully help us improve the next generation of products. When you go into the world and you consider that, if you end up as a designer, you end up in a manufacturing company, you end up working for a big brand, you will have to think about that. And because the decisions you make now about those products will affect future generations, and the decisions you make about where you go to school and what you do and where you spend your money, how you interact with people and brands and spaces, that also affects the future of the materials that we use. And also, you have an incredible power in that choice. The wonderful thing about capitalist society that we live in is that your choices matter to the brands. They might be a huge brand, but if enough people start saying, you know what, I'm not going to purchase that, they haven't really thought about the future of the material that I'm using. They're using materials that I don't like. They're maybe producing in countries that don't have good human rights. If you stop purchasing them, then the company has to change. So in that way, it's almost like voting with your money. You actually get companies to change through that process. So, okay, talked a lot. We're at 41. That's kind of where I'm at. So if you have questions that you want to ask, I'm here to answer them.
Yeah, sure. So I guess, first of all, this presentation has been really enlightening. It's amazing how some of these materials are being reused. For students who might be interested in learning more about this sort of aspect about material science and sustainability, are there any resources you recommend to them?
Sure. There are many, many, many. So what I would recommend, if anyone's got questions, email me. That's fine. I can deal with it. Because there are so many different resources. We have a material library in New York City. We have a database, online database, but it's too expensive for you. But there are ways in which you can learn anyway. There are free websites. There are ways. So if there are particular areas that your colleagues are interested in, ask the question. So say you're interested in, okay, well, I'm looking for a resource to think differently about recycling in my area, or I'm looking for a resource because I'm interested in what aerospace is currently doing about materials. Just send them over. I can, I have resources. I have so many resources. So just let me know which ones you're interested in. I can directly send you links to those places.
Got it. And then I know we're at time, and I respect your time, but would you be able to take a couple of questions?
Sure, no problem.
Wow, thank you so much. Okay, so I guess now we'll be moving on to the Q&A segment of this event, where all of you guys have the opportunity to ask questions to Dr. Dent. Here's how it'll work. So either you guys can put your questions in the everyone chat, and if you see a question in the everyone chat that you'd like to be addressed, you can add a caret sign underneath it. So it's sort of like an upvote. So we can see that and be like, okay, a lot of people want this question to be addressed. And if you'd like to remain anonymous in your questions, you can PM Ray or Sanjay saying anonymous : and then ask your question. We have a couple of questions that our team over here would like to start out with, but once we wrap up with those, we can jump to some of the questions you guys have.
Okay.
So our first question for you is, what's your story on how you sort of came to be an EVP at Material Connection, a chief material scientist at SANDOW, who gets to work on some of the most cutting edge products in the world?
Because I wasn't very good at basketball. I trained as I went through college, I did my degree, I did a degree in materials, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I knew I was pretty good at basketball, so I ended up playing professional basketball for a couple of years. But because in the UK, professional basketball is very different than the US, you still need to have another job. So I ended up doing a PhD at the same time. But because I realized I wasn't good enough at basketball, I wasn't going to make any money, I wasn't going to be really successful, I gave that up and thought, okay, well, what else can I do? So I ended up just sort of working on, I think it was more just a general curiosity about the physical world, okay? So when you look at the world, so when a designer looks at the world, what they see is textures and colors, okay? When I look at the world, I see chemistry, I see chemicals. So when I look at the wall next to me, I see the paint. I know that paint is a certain type of polymer. I think behind that, I've got sheetrock, and sheetrock is paper plus a gypsum material. I think of everything in terms of what it's made out of. And that sort of curiosity, I realized that when I was an academic, I was doing a little bit of teaching in Cambridge, and I realized also that I get much more enjoyment from interacting with designers. Designers are very creative people. They're very childlike, but in a good way. They're always curious and excited by new things. And I got a lot of energy and enjoyment from those people. So I realized that I could take what I knew from science and help the designers and the brands improve what they do. So if I just stayed in academia, I would have been a professor and scientist and would have just stayed in one way. But I found it much more enjoyable to work with the creative people. I love artists. We work with a lot of artists. That creative energy for me is the most exciting thing to have. So I like interacting with those people. And I realized that the job I do, I could take my science that I knew and help creative people improve, because they didn't need to know the science. I could help them with that, and then they could create better products and experiences as a result. And then I've been at the company for 20 years. So, so I've been there basically from the start. And you spend 20 years in any company, like inevitably you get good at what you do, and it kind of worked from there.
That's pretty interesting. Do you have any sort of tips or advice for any students here who would like to pursue a similar sort of career with a mix of science and engineering?
It's good to get the fundamentals first. I would say, I loved engineering, I loved science, I loved math. I wasn't great at English. I've written books, but my English knowledge came a lot later. So my science was really the first love. To me, I think the real value is to have a focus, but also interact with as many different people from different disciplines as possible. So much of what we do requires that, I can't know everything. I know my little world, but sometimes we'll need a biologist. Sometimes we'll need a designer, we'll need an engineer, we'll need different disciplines. So much of what we need to do nowadays requires multiple different disciplines. So I'd recommend focus on your core ability, but always, if you can, talk to other people from different disciplines. Learn what they know, and it gives you a much broader understanding of what's out there. Because, within high school, you want to get through your exams, you want to do well in those, and it's relatively sort of narrow and siloed. Then you get to college, and it broadens up a little bit. And I think that's where you can really, have your major discipline, but just try and broaden it up as much as possible. Because just focusing on one area, I think, will always limit your ability to learn and to grow. So experience as many different disciplines as possible, and it can be learning from English people, from poets, from artists. They've always got some insight and knowledge to share. I got one extra thing to add, so I'll stop talking and saying that. I talk to my researchers and I say, I was on the phone this morning with a bunch of different people. Okay, so you go to the internet, use the internet all the time, okay? And you often do all of your interaction through email or through texting or whatever the other social media is. If you can talk to a specialist or someone who's knowledgeable in that area, in 10 minutes, you will learn more than you would do in 3 months on the web. Learn from experts, learn from people who know their discipline, because they can very quickly, get you knowledgeable in areas that you could not get, because the internet tells you what it wants to tell you. But in a conversation with someone on the phone, you can then ask the right questions and get the information you need. So human interaction, literal conversations with people who know what they're talking about, so valuable. So if you can, do that as much as you can.
Got it. That's actually really interesting. So kind of what we're doing right now with you, where we're sort of bringing in thought leaders and asking you guys questions.
Right.
We have a question from someone in our audience who's wondering that, is it possible that materials like glass and copper will one day run out? And if so, is there any way we can stop that?
If our population keeps growing, we're at like 7.8 billion, we'll be 9 billion, I think, by 2030, I think it is. Our population keeps growing. If we keep on using copper at the same amount that we're currently using, and we don't recycle every single bit of copper that exists, Yeah, we could run out of it. Glass, same thing. So we need to get better at recycling. So a lot of glass just ends up, glass is tough because glass ends up on landfills. A lot of it ends up on landfills. So we could mine the landfills, get glass back. Copper doesn't tend to, because remember, metals tend to get recycled a lot more effectively. So copper, we could end up running out of it. But my belief is, though, that we will find alternatives in the same way that we're talking about, think about your brain, okay? Your brain is a wonderful, flawed, but wonderful computer, okay? It requires no metals at all, no silicon. Whereas your computer requires metals and silicon, right? So that's the basis of computing right now, is metals and silicon. So in theory, we could make a better computer just using organic materials. And this organic material was grown through feeding it bananas and burgers and pizza and whatever else over the years. So in theory, we could make great computers out of biological materials. So we just haven't got there. We are getting there, though. So maybe we won't need copper in the way that we need it now. Maybe we'll move towards a more biological and therefore renewable future. That is my hope. My hope is the 21st, 22nd century will be a biological period where we can find materials and we can grow things more effectively rather than having to mine them out of the ground, stick them onto it and use them that way. So we could potentially, already the screen on my computer is an organic LED. So LEDs are little chips made out of ceramics. Organic LEDs are polymers that can be made out of renewable materials. So already the screens that you're looking through are potentially made out of organic materials, things that can be grown. So we're already seeing it in screens. We might see it in silicon chips and therefore computing soon. So my hope is that we will, when we get to the point where we don't have any more of those materials, we get to a point where we've now managed to make it out of things that are renewable.
Is there anything that's stopping us from switching to all natural materials, or are we just sort of relying on this point where, oh no, we don't have any more copper?
Well, as I said, the brain is flawed, right? We don't remember things. It gets old. It's pretty fragile. So we're not there yet. We are getting there, but the challenge, of course, is that I want my computer and I want it to. I want it a certain way. I want it to a certain cost. I want certain, So biology doesn't always work as quickly as other synthetic materials. So there are limitations. They're looking at organic computing, but it's a little while yet. And then also, if you built the computer, would the computer simply look like a fish tank with a whole bunch of organs in there? What does it look like? It doesn't look like a thin sheet of nice aluminum that you can carry around in your backpack. What does it look like? How do we then make it back into something which we can carry around with us, has the durability to drop it once or twice? Think about the average phone. If I made this out of natural materials, what is it? Is it going to be as hard and durable as this thing? Or am I going to have a different case? So moving to organic materials could be good for static things, but if I want the same usability and lowish cost of our current electronics, then what do I use? So it's a process. It's going to evolve. It's very hard to predict the future, though. If you think about every prediction about the future, think about what we thought 2020 would be back in the 1970s. We're all going to be flying cars and whatever. No one knows. We'll see.
Got it. Last question, just because we are running out of time. What are some of the problems in the world regarding material sustainability that perhaps high schoolers may be able to help out with?
Personal choice. Making that capitalist decision to think about what your purchases are. You are going to be the next generation of consumers and producers and decision makers. So for me, become knowledgeable and also share your opinion. It's amazing how quickly a government, a brand, an organization will think again if you've got people like yourselves, responding. Because, Greta Thunberg, the sort of environmentalist, high school students, yes, lucky that she hit the place at the right time, but people listened to her. You had a bunch of old people who said, no, we shouldn't listen to her, but you know what? Everybody knows her name, everybody knows what she believes. So, it is possible to have that voice, and with social media and with the direct interaction you have with your local government, with federal government, with brands, with other people, you can influence. I always think about, what was it? The K-pop people who basically influenced. There was a rally that Trump was trying to have, I think, and basically a bunch of probably high school kids who loved K-pop. They were able to influence that outcome. That to me was great, because it said when a bunch of people who don't have any monetary power, don't have any sort of like traditional power, yet they can influence things. So they get together, if they work collaboratively, they can influence things. So I think, that's probably perhaps a little more broad, but you have more power than you think. But I want you to think and consider and learn and then make decisions based upon that understanding.
Got it. Thank you so much for coming, Dr. Dent. We really appreciate it.
Sure, it was nice to be able to talk to you guys. Hopefully you've learned something, and as I said, if you have any other questions, just email me over, maybe through you, Sanjay. I'm happy to answer them if I can and provide resources.
Got it. Thank you so much. And if you guys would like to, stay tuned for any future speaker events we'll be having in the month of November and December, I'll leave a link to our Facebook group in the chat, and you guys can like the group, and you guys will be updated on any sort of future speaker events.
Thanks, guys. Nice being with you. Take care.
Bye, Dr. Dent.
Thank you, Mr. Dent. Have a good day.
Thank you.